Thank you. It's a great pleasure to be with all of you here today to talk about a topic that we all find so incredibly important to the future of our countries and to the future of the world order. We're here today talking about something that I think is really fascinating, something that's a real challenge. The ways in which the environment around us, the international environment around us, is changing and presenting new threats, new ways of warfare, and new requirements for statecraft. Whether you are from a large country such as the United States of America, or a smaller country, and we are collectively engaged in these efforts to preserve the sovereignty of our states and the order, the international order that actually we all have a common interest in preserving. What I'd like to do today is talk to you about two threats that are very much on our mind as threats to that international order. The first is ISIS, and the second is Al-Qaeda. We talk about the first, ISIS, quite a lot these days, and we have had a tendency to forget the second. And I'd like to talk about the strategies of each group, how these groups are presenting themselves and readying themselves, and then how you and all of us need to approach the challenges that they present, particularly in a world where we're also starting to see the reemergence of great power struggles, the reemergence of powers such as the United States on the one hand, Russia on the other, and an environment where these kinds of threats are actually involving state actors such as those. So let's start by talking about ISIS and recognize that ISIS has a strategy. And I think one of the mistakes that we very often make when we think about terrorist groups is to imagine that because they don't have the kinds of institutions that we do as states, we tend to underestimate their capacity for planning, and for conceptualizing and for actually changing the way that, frankly, the way that the international community has to respond. And ISIS's global strategy really exists in three rings, three concentric rings. ISIS is focused right now on Iraq and Syria, the heartland of its caliphate. ISIS has yet another component of the execution of its strategy in the near abroad, in the historic lands that once belonged to the caliphate. And then ISIS has a global campaign that actually transpires in the rest of the world. And of course, ISIS's goal is to establish a global caliphate and to create the conditions in which there is an apocalyptic battle between ISIS and the West that will bring about the conditions whereby the caliphate that they have geographically established actually becomes a global achievement. So they have a conception of themselves as a global entity, and they have a set of objectives that they are trying to achieve in order to make that global entity a reality. And they are doing so in these three rings: Iraq and Syria, the historic caliphate lands, and then out there in the world. ISIS as an organization is actually conducting its campaigns differently in these different areas. We were all very focused on ISIS's rise in Iraq and Syria because ISIS focused on taking terrain as a key component of its campaign actually to declare its caliphate. And we watched it grow from actually a terrorist organization that was focused on spectacular attacks against Iraqi civilians and Iraqi security forces into a real hybrid threat, an organization that could actually function not just as a terrorist organization, but as an army, and bring to bear different capabilities and components across the spectrum of warfare, and really go from being a terrorist organization to being an army that conquered Fallujah and that conquered Mosul. And that actually made a run for Baghdad in the summer of 2014. That's really quite an achievement when you think about it. For an organization that in 2010 and 2011, U.S. military and government officials assessed was actually either defeated or destroyed, to come back, rebuild themselves, and actually gain capacities like ISIS did to control terrain, and to do so in a way that was spectacular. Why was it spectacular? Well, because we expect terrorist groups to do terrorist things, to attack spectacularly a variety of targets for the purpose of generating disproportionate political effects. But what ISIS did that was really interesting and spectacular was change the face of terrorism and made the clearing, holding, and taking consolidation of terrain something that actually was not only something that terrorist organizations did, but something that they actually had to aim to achieve. Something that set a new international standard, a new, I don't want to say a new normal, but a much flashier way of being a terrorist organization. And Iraq and Syria are still very much at the heart of ISIS. And the terrain that ISIS controls in Iraq and Syria is critical, is in fact a center of gravity of their success. Why? Because in fact, it is the fact that ISIS can lay claim to a physical caliphate, that it can recruit people to come and defend, that is giving ISIS its global resonance, that is making its message actually resonate with foreign fighters and regional fighters in a way that, frankly, Al-Qaeda's message is not resonating right now, because Al-Qaeda, for a variety of reasons, does not have that terrain and cannot make that call. ISIS's protection of Iraq and Syria, therefore, is certainly something that's very important. But since 2014, since the summer of 2014 and the declaration of the caliphate, ISIS has pursued a strategy to make sure that it actually could go global. Really, in November of 2014, it started to announce the formation of governorates in different areas around the world, primarily focused in historic caliphate lands, in places such as Egypt, Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Libya, Algeria. We now see, of course, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Caucasus, among many others. And the point was not to claim like with like, to say that a piece of terrain in Libya was akin to a piece of terrain in Iraq and Syria, but rather actually to start talking about how it would organize itself and other Salafi jihadi groups within its movement and within its quest actually to establish a global caliphate. And to have a caliphate, really to claim a caliphate in order to keep it successful, it needed to be in more places than Iraq and Syria. And ISIS did, in fact, really work to take existing Salafi jihadi groups in places such as Sinai, Egypt, or places such as Libya, and really get those groups to pledge allegiance to ISIS, to receive resources and training from ISIS, and then actually to make them part of a global network. And right now, we see these areas in the Middle East giving strategic depth and resilience to ISIS. Even as it loses some terrain in Iraq and Syria, it is actually able to continue to grow its footprint and move its leadership, move some of its junior and mid-grade leadership, and continue actually to engage in its expansion, even as it has lost terrain inside of Iraq. This strategic resilience is something that ISIS has always wanted, but it actually has a greater depth even than that. The idea that ISIS should be a global movement, as I said, was part of its self-conception from the declaration of the caliphate. And what we have seen ISIS doing globally is creating conditions in which it can flourish and thrive. And there are actually some particular features of ISIS's global campaign that I want to call out. We can talk about the rest of them in Q&A. But ISIS in particular has a strategy for Europe that I'd like to highlight, not only because of the sad situations that we've seen in Brussels and Paris, but also because I think it is so vitally important and frankly so existential for free and democratic states to have a challenge like ISIS on their doorstep. Why? ISIS's strategy for Europe, ISIS's strategy even in some respects for the United States, is focused on radicalizing and polarizing. Radicalizing Muslim communities that would not necessarily even see themselves and primarily identify themselves as Muslim, and polarize European society in a way that makes it necessary or attractive for the Muslim majority to identify with ISIS rather than integrate into European society or stay, in some respects, not engage in ISIS's radicalization effort. Radicalize and polarize. What does that mean? Well, it means that ISIS is betting on crackdowns within Europe, and frankly, even within the United States, a sense of hostility toward immigrants, toward refugees, and the rise of a far-right discourse in politics in order to create further mobilization of Muslim communities that should otherwise be and could otherwise be either neutral or part of a European future. And I think that this is a particular threat, not only because it means that we're going to see terrorist attacks, but because ISIS is smart enough to know that the kind of overreaction that many countries will have is actually something that will serve its benefit and create a more willing and receptive population to its messages. And since ISIS is really trying very hard to make its message resonate, to say that you, whoever you are, should come defend the caliphate against attack, this kind of resonance, this kind of message, this kind of strategy is actually really particularly interesting, effective, and important to all of us. ISIS is not the only threat that we face, however. As a terrorist organization, it's not alone. In fact, I think that one of the things that ISIS has done is so explicitly change the way we respond to terrorism that in a world where we have, all of us, too much to think about, even about our security, we have too much to think about. We have a crisis and a violent crisis in so many places of the world, whether it's Iraq or Syria or Afghanistan, Pakistan, whether we're looking at the civil war in Yemen, whether we're looking at Libya. We're seeing an incredible amount of churn and change. And ISIS wants to exploit that churn and change, but we have too much to pay attention to. And Al-Qaeda is actually something that I think we're underestimating, because it is using the opportunity that ISIS has created in order to gain strength in a different way. How so? Well, Al-Qaeda shares ISIS's global objectives. It likewise wishes to establish a global caliphate. They argue about means and method. When should the state be declared? Under what circumstances? And how best can it be declared and preserved? ISIS obviously has one answer. Al-Qaeda's answer is much more gradualist and has to do with the co-optation of populations. But the end state is the same, and Al-Qaeda remains dangerous, especially as it is covered by the spectacular attacks that ISIS is launching all over the world, and the attention that ISIS is getting in Iraq, Syria, Libya, and elsewhere. Al-Qaeda is essentially using this space, this time, and this diversion. I don't want to say it's a diversion of international attention. It's a focus of international attention, rightly, but the limited bandwidth of international attention in order to create essentially a more robust organization that is able to survive in states like Iraq and Syria, and come up, particularly in Syria, in the wake of ISIS's decline, and use the opportunities created by state failure and protracted civil war, actually to play a long game, to attract populations as the not ISIS, as the not brutal, not violent. Yes, it's okay to work with them because they're, not as grotesque or as flamboyant as ISIS has been, and create a popular support for Al-Qaeda that it didn't have before, as the better of bad options, of course, but nevertheless an option. And we see that very much in Syria with Syrian affiliate Jabhat al-Nusra, which ISIS actually poses a much greater threat to our security and stability over the long term than does ISIS, because it is rooted in popular strength, it is rooted in institutions, it is rooted not in conquest but in co-optation, with a little bit of conquest on the side in order to make sure that there are no surviving institutions and structures in Syria that can actually resist it over the long term. What do we do? What do we do? Well, I think first we need to recognize the magnitude of the threat, and that it is actually something that is existential to all of us. We cannot actually be free. We cannot actually preserve state institutions. We cannot actually preserve an international order if we have organizations like ISIS challenging us in two ways. One, by creating a counter state that really changes the boundaries and borders around us by use of violence and by force. And two, by provoking overreactions and creating, especially in those of us who are blessed enough to live in free countries, a spirit whereby the pursuit of security so triumphs over the pursuit of liberty and the freedoms of speech that we hold, that the kind of crackdown that they elicit actually destroys the very organizations and the very institutions that we wish to preserve. Second, I think we need to recognize that we're all looking for solutions now, but we have a long fight. ISIS and Al-Qaeda have taken a generational approach, and we need likewise to take a generational approach to this struggle. ISIS and Al-Qaeda have, of course, invested in a terrible way in young people, in training their next generation, in taking long advantage of potential state failure and laying the groundwork for future organizations. We actually need to recognize that we have a generational problem too, and that one of the most important things we can do now is to actually think about creating the cadre of people in our countries who are actually going to be responsible for combating ISIS and Al-Qaeda, not now, but 10, 15, and 20 years down the road when they are still actually important organizations, or when they have changed in their very particulars, but their character has fundamentally altered the nature of terrorism. We need to be prepared for that and not think that there's an instant here and now solution. We actually need to think in what I would call long-term terms. In the manner, at least we have a manner and a method of doing so here in the United States. We did so during the Cold War, and we did so with an understanding that this was a multi-generational challenge, that it required thinking, that it required strategic formulation and strategic patience, and that we could not take shortcuts to get to our end state. We actually needed to compete with the ideas and values of who we were, and bring those ideas and values forward, and challenge the ideas and values of our adversaries, but not do it only through ideas and values, actually to do it through constant engagement, a sense of the nature of the threat, and a sense of the importance of each interaction for achieving a long-term strategic aim. I think that we have a tendency to rush, and I think the United States is most guilty of that. We want to see solutions quickly. We want to see them now. We're not going to get them soon. What do we need to do soon? What do we need to do against ISIS? What do we need to do militarily? Well, for one thing, ISIS cannot remain in Iraq and Syria. ISIS cannot remain on a piece of terrain. As long as it has a place to call the caliphate, it will prompt recruitment from overseas. Unfortunately, we've moved very slowly, and ISIS has moved very quickly, and it has created these pockets of resilience globally. And what I think we will find is that it will lose terrain in Iraq and Syria, and nevertheless retain its capacity to mobilize internationally and reinforce, and will in fact remain an organization even if its leadership, its current leadership, no longer remains. That's why the long fight is so important. Really recognizing the challenge that ISIS faces. But I think if we do that, and if we thoughtfully and carefully engage with a long-term focus, we can in fact win both the real hardcore kinetic battle and the battle of ideas, of values, of institutions, and restore the world order that we rely on as sovereign states and free people. All right, let me take your questions. Go ahead.
Thank you so much for your remarks. What is your assessment of U.S. policy towards Syria vis-a-vis ISIS? Mm-hmm. And some suggest that maybe it would be a good idea for the United States to work with Russia in Syria against the common enemy that is ISIS. Do you think that's a recommended course of action? Thank you.
Great, terrific questions. Let me actually let me start with the second. I think the United States really likes to operate with international partners. And our international partners, thank goodness, actually like to work with us, and we're very blessed to have the kinds of partners that you here represent. But the United States does have a little bit of a naivete in thinking that everyone in every state out there could potentially be an international partner. Yes, could they? I suppose so. Is Russia? I don't think so. Russia has very different goals in Syria, in the Middle East, and globally than the United States, such as, first, Russia is very interested in reversing the Cold War gains, that the Cold War and post-Cold War gains that the United States has made, and creating a world order that is favorable to it. They say that in their national security strategy. So it shouldn't really be a mystery to us that that's what they're up to, particularly when they then take actions that back that up. Secondly, Russia is, in fact, acting in Syria on behalf of the regime. We see that in its actions, in the way that it focuses its military assets and the way that it uses its diplomacy. The United States still continues a policy, I think quite correct one, of identifying Bashar al-Assad and his regime as an accelerant of violence within the Middle East, an accelerant of recruitment. And therefore, if Russia is backing Bashar al-Assad, there is a problem with hinging our policy on Russia. Can we converge part of the way? I actually think not. I actually think that that is unwise, and I can see that because I'm a civilian and I don't work for the government. But I think it's unwise for a variety of reasons. One, because Russia is gaining international credibility through its use of force within the Middle East, and that is something that does not suit our interests, nor does it suit the goals of having an international order that is maintained through rule of law, not use of force. Two, I also think that we, as alliances, need to be pretty smart about the kinds of capabilities that the Russians are bringing and placing in places that are kind of close to places that the United States and its allies care about. With the installation of an S-400 and other really impressive military capabilities inside of Syria on the Turkish border, Russia has actually played, I think, a very significant game and actually has started to threaten NATO from its southern flank. I think the United States, therefore, needs to see the contest in Syria not only within the ISIS light, but within the great powers light, within the contest for NATO and its future. I happen to believe in the value of the alliance. I've had the privilege of serving in Afghanistan as part of our fantastic coalition headquarters out in headquarters ISAF Kabul for quite a lot of months. And if we actually mean to defend the principles that we say that we need to defend, we actually need to start thinking now about the geostrategic implications of Russia in a vital part of the world. Great. You got it.
Dr. Kagan, Kevin Stringer, Special Operations Command Europe.
Thanks.
Based on your research, how should we contemplate Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab in this construct? That would be the first part of my question.
Great.
Second part would be, ISIS is an evolution from Al-Qaeda. In your research and kind of assessment, do you think we'll see an ISIS 2.0 or another evolution of the organization? Be interested for your thoughts on both those questions.
Great. Let me start with Boko, because I think it's actually a truly significant organization. But I actually think that ISIS, in its welcoming of wilayats, was a little perhaps surprised by Boko Haram's pledge. Boko Haram as an organization, very sophisticated, obviously, very lethal, very dangerous, but in some respects, not the kind of organization that ISIS goes looking for to begin with, because in fact ISIS cannot shape Boko Haram. Boko Haram can shape ISIS. And I think that we always consider ISIS's relationship with Boko Haram as an anomaly among the various governorates that ISIS has established, precisely because we have not seen, other than media capabilities, the giving of capabilities, at least through open sources, from the ISIS center out to Boko Haram. And we haven't seen that kind of mutuality that we see in other relationships, such as in CERT in Libya or in Sinai. So I don't want to diminish it, because I actually think that it is significant and a very important organization. I just think it's an anomaly in ISIS world compared to the other vilayats that they've set up. So I think really, really great question. ISIS 2.0, yes, ISIS has changed the face of terrorism. And if ISIS were in fact to suffer a catastrophic defeat, such that its leadership and its terrain in Iraq and Syria no longer survived, I do actually think that we would see a next version, a next generation of ISIS. In fact, first of all, ISIS has already changed the way other terrorist organizations function. And in particular, ISIS has set a new standard for what constitutes a terrorist organization. Yes, you can control terrain, you can be an army. Have we seen that before? Yes, I suppose Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula has been a terrorist army in its past incarnations, but it's very interesting that it is also becoming a terrorist army again right now, which is not something that we've really seen since 2009. So that's ISIS's new bar. And I think that we'll see it modeled elsewhere. Secondly, ISIS has set a new standard for how to recruit globally. And we see this evolution affecting organizations such as the Taliban, which has not had a bad media campaign hitherto, but has actually changed the way it is doing its strategic messaging in order to essentially live stream and live tweet some of its terrorist attacks. That is not something that the Taliban just thought of sitting wherever they were sitting. It is something that they've modeled, and we're seeing that kind of evolution really, I think, across the board in places that are that diverse. So overall, the character of terrorism is changing. I think we will see more grabs for terrain, more army-based models, more play for global resonance. And I do actually think that there is an online digital community that will continue to be attracted and recruited by ISIS or other organizations. And that's one of the reasons why it's a long fight. Because ISIS has put an idea out there, and that idea is going to stay out there past its lifespan, particularly since it's been out there so long. But lastly, I actually want to point out that the underlying reason or ability why ISIS has been able to take off in Iraq, in Syria, and in the historic areas of the Caliphate is persistent state failure. Failure of the Iraqi state, failure and complete collapse of the Syrian state. Yemen, failed state. Mali, I hope it hangs in there. Libya, it hurts, but it's a failed state. And so as we actually see this kind of vacuum where the institutions of sovereign states cannot actually exist, we are going to see the kinds of underlying grievances that actually produce the kinds of recruits that Al-Qaeda and ISIS are looking for. They will exploit those governance gaps with vigor. And I think we'll see that soon again in Iraq. I think we will continue to see that in Syria. And unfortunately, we have a problem where we need to build states and institutions, not a problem where we just need to kill bad guys. Great.
Doctor, thanks so much. I just want to pick up on that last bit in the 2.0. So when I hear your problem definition, on one hand, I hear a three-tiered global strategy,
Yep.
highly sophisticated,
Yep.
by an organization, a group, whatever we want to call them.
Yep.
And then I heard you speak to a multi-generational
Yep.
journey, which implies a military defeat. And I guess I'd just like you to talk
Yep.
maybe a little bit about what are the alternative outcomes here. If it is as sophisticated as you say, then maybe military defeat isn't going to happen soon. And so what do those other outcomes look like?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and thank you for asking it. My team and I at the Institute for the Study of War have been engaged in a planning exercise to figure out what to do about ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And it has been actually, frankly, one of the most frustrating exercises I have ever undertaken. And I say that as someone who has spent 15 months in Afghanistan. So, you know, I say it with a great deal of vigor. We have a problem set that is urgent and requires solution, and we have one that isn't going to be solved in the near term. What are the sets of solutions that we actually need to look toward? Well, I'll tell you that we have looked at what kinds of military solutions there might be to ISIS, and we have not found one that works, that actually takes care of the dual problem of ISIS on the one hand and Al-Qaeda on the other. Every course of action that we have tested in our planning has resulted in, on occasion, harm done to ISIS. And in every scenario that we have gamed, Al-Qaeda, particularly in Syria, benefits and ends up stronger. And the problem that is taking us months to solve is this latter problem. How do we prevent Al-Qaeda from just filling a gap left by a collapsing ISIS in places where there are real fundamental underlying problems? So I'm not going to tell you I have a magic solution, because I don't. We're still meeting, and we're pretty frustrated planners. But I will tell you that here are the kinds of things I think we need to look at. Where does military action matter the most? It actually matters the most on the extremes. It matters the most in Iraq and Syria, where ISIS controls terrain that they need to be dislodged from. And it matters the most, frankly, in some franchises that are still small enough to be nipped in the bud, if not through law enforcement means, which I think are very important and can be used, then through military means. It's actually in the middle of that spectrum that you have sort of the most dangerous ISIS, I think. And it's not amenable it's not easily amenable to the use of force, not in a way that I think we would be comfortable. We need actually to rethink how we look at warfare. And I think that we are under-engaging in economic warfare against ISIS, which I think is one of the most effective tools when combined with military pressure, with law enforcement, that we can use. ISIS needs money. It survives on money. Will it survive with less money? You bet. It's an idea. But I think that we've seen an inflection over the past 60 or 90 days as the US has combined more targeting of ISIS's financial capabilities and economic structures and institutions with other ways of getting at the financial flows. I think that's incredibly important. That too, though, is a long game, and we've watched the attempt to use that before to achieve decisive results against groups such as, say, the Haqqani Network or Hezbollah. And the results are just not decisive on their own, but they're important to take in conjunction and coordination. we do actually need to counter ISIS in the media sphere, but I think we need to do it in a very different way from what we like to do in the United States, and I make fun of us because we're just so bad at it as a government. We need to take advantage of the fact that there are free people with ideas who can express those ideas and actually create a counter narrative, not in a short term, in a long term. And I actually think that one of the most important things that we can do within that information sphere is actually think about the ways of delegitimizing ISIS within its own organization, creating fitna within the forums, creating a kind of disjunction and religious churn within the protected forums of ISIS. And other radical organizations not radical organizations, Salafi jihadi organizations, in order to bring a kind of discord that actually reflects really sort of makes it impossible for them effectively to claim ownership of an idea and propagate that ownership on the basis of adherence within the forum. So that's just a range of things that we can do, but we absolutely have to do those while also building state institutions and governance in places like Iraq, instead of imagining that there is a state there that's actually just going to come right at the end of our actions. Go ahead.
Meet you.
Thank you. Thanks
I had
for
a
coming.
pleasure of meeting you in Washington, D.C., the time that you were serving in Afghanistan.
Yeah.
First, I have some tough questions for you. First of all, that McChrystal, the
Yeah.
great McChrystal, we Afghans, we loved him very much, and you served him with him. Do you feel some responsibility, you and your respected husband, advising him the time when he was serving in Afghanistan with the new surge and all the other? That is first. The responsibility about the new counterinsurgency plan, which didn't work that much. So you were part of the team. Second is about you sound to me not a historian. You sound to me like a political figure who's pushing a special doctrine of long time war or long fight. Correct me if I'm wrong. The third one is, I haven't heard anything from your conversation or speaking about the ESS or something about Islamic world, about the scholars, about them coming forward, getting involved, because you don't know that much about that part of the world. And this is what ESL want, in fact, that you would address them and you would neglect and ignore the 99% of the Muslim world who are more the target of these mad thugs. I may call, I'm sorry, with all due respect. So where is that Dr. Kagan that I was meeting who was advising us and now who is not talking, not letting me to be involved?
Well, I certainly didn't mean to tell you not to be involved. I actually think we all have a role in this fight, and I would say that, yes, of course you have one, as do the scholars of the Islamic world. But in fact, this is not a Muslim problem. This is a fight within the Muslim community, but it's a fight that actually affects all of us. And I think that attempts actually to diminish it and to shoehorn it really actually mistake the nature of the threat. And so that is why I'm very passionate that the West has a role, just as I am confident that the Muslim world has a role in the struggle against ISIS, okay? So let me actually begin with that. As to whether I'm a historian, I have a PhD in history, so I'm just going to say I think I would probably qualify academically, but as with so many things, that doesn't actually mean that I qualify with practical experience. But I think history tells us some really important lessons about the nature of war and the nature of the struggle of ideas. I'm not particularly pushing any agenda. I actually told you I don't have a magic solution to this problem. What I am telling you, though, is that we are in a contest. It is a political struggle. This is very much about how we perceive a threat to all of us and how we actually adapt and change our methods of warfare, international relations, and statecraft to meet a challenge that is going to be with us persistently. And I think that we can and should look for particular policies in the here and now. But if we don't understand the nature and the magnitude of the fight and the fact that it is actually going to require us to rethink what constitutes war and peace? When are we actually at war? Are we at war when someone declares war on us? Or are we at war when we declare war on someone? What is the nature of war and warfare in the modern age? It is obviously no longer just state-based threats, but it's not just international terrorist actors. We actually have states that are out there right now doing an incredible amount of damage to the international order by encroaching on the sovereignty of other states. Russia's predatory behavior in Ukraine may be one such, where the United States doesn't actually know what to do because, in fact, the paradigm of warfare that is being conducted by our state-based enemy is so different from what it was that we have expected, that we don't know what our policy should be, whether we're in war and peace, how to defend an ally, or how to defend our own interests. That, I think, is the nature of the world that we're in. And I wish it weren't so. I really wish it weren't so. But the faster we get through our stages of grieving and recognize that we're there, and I'm not speaking about you. Afghanistan has been in a state of war for so many decades. So I don't want to make this personal to you, but the United States does not think of itself as operating in a world like this, and we want to go back to the old paradigm. That'd be great. I want to do that too. We have to shift our paradigm as soon as possible. Recognize when we have not succeeded in our own undertakings, learn from them, and apply those lessons to the kinds of statecraft that the world as it is now actually demands.
Okay, we're going to have to stop here. And I know we've got lots of questions, but Dr. Kagan has a way to give us some.
Do one more? All right. Wonderful.
Thank you very much for a very enlightening talk. I'm representing Pakistan, so I would like to make use of this forum. I saw repeated references to Pakistan once it came to ISIS, so I felt that it's a too august and too diversified forum to take the wrong lessons. The way you said that ISIS is a political struggle, so naturally it breeds in the political void. Pakistan's political system, no matter how faulty it may be, good or bad, does not afford a void. So repeated references to IS in Pakistan probably might not be correct. I think the number of instances related to ISIS in Pakistan can be compared to any other country. I guess probably in the United States, the events attributed to the violent incidents related to ISIS might be more than what has happened in Pakistan. Yeah. So I would like to clarify for the clarification of the House that there is no IS footprint in Pakistan. I would also like to go back to the previous question that is by a friend from Afghanistan. There is a need to understand the culture of our region. Yes. There is no appeal for IS. Taliban represent a semi-political struggle, which is like a violent come political. And that's why you see that the only people who brandish themselves as the IS are those who are not the new inductees. They are the ones who are the splinter groups from the Taliban, and they found a rebranding just to carry the flag. Coming back to the question, it was just a comment for the clarification of the House. As you refer to that you have not, I mean, we have not been able to come to a great course of action that can actually lead to addressing both the problems of Al-Qaeda and ISIS. One leads to other. I mean, you solve one, the other gets generated. My question is specific to Afghanistan. Taliban are fighting a narrative, and what do you think that if we go for the reconciliation with the Taliban, will it not obviate the chances of ISIS generating its footprint in Afghanistan as well as Al-Qaeda?
Let me actually take this on and try to take it on economically. I hope what you say is true, and I hope that there is no Islamic State inside of Pakistan. Sadly, we are seeing some evidence in the way that attacks are happening and in the way that ISIS is actually speaking of how it's staging into Afghanistan that suggests that in some of the tribal areas there is actually some ISIS. I hope that's not true, because I actually think that ISIS is a big danger in Afghanistan and Pakistan, even though neither country really fits the mold of what ISIS should be seeking or looking for. For one thing, ISIS is a Salafi jihadi group, and that is not a natural implant. For another thing, ISIS takes as its legacy that of Al-Qaeda and is focused more on the Middle East and the Levant. But I also think that we can fail in our imaginations if we do not think that there is room for ISIS in Afghanistan and in Pakistan. ISIS is actually looking for splinter groups. Yes, they're splinter groups. Absolutely. But if ISIS magnetizes them and resources them, they are extremely dangerous splinters, particularly if they end up operating in areas with a weak government structure and a high amount of violence. I think that we in the United States like to imagine that when violent groups compete with one another, that's good, because at least they're fighting themselves and they're not fighting us. What we are seeing is a kind of terrorist Darwinism in which the strongest terrorist groups survive, and that the fighting among them actually strengthens them vis-a-vis one another in a way that makes them more potent overall and more dangerous to our states and to the world. So that's why it may not be a problem that we see ISIS 1.0 in Afghanistan and in the border areas. Maybe they are not the idea that will take over, but they are creating the kinds of violence and participating in the kinds of competition that will actually improve the skills and the resilience of terrorist groups overall while weakening those of weak states. And we as a whole really need to protect against that and not dismiss them, even if they aren't representative of a large population.